All right, so we are back and we are going to discuss sustainable energy in this presentation. Um, and what's kind of interesting with sustainable energy, a lot of people think about sustainable energy and they think renewable energy sources or a variety of different things. Sustainable energy is a little bit different than renewable energy. With sustainable, we just want to be able to utilize the resources we have without kind of robbing the future. Some of the alternative energy sources that we think of are not necessarily sustainable. So we're going to kind of talk through some of this as we go through the presentation. So first thing with sustainable energy we have to think about is conservation. So we could think about ways to save energy. There's green building that could be done to cut energy costs. We have some of that stuff here on campus with sustainabilities and some of our initiatives with light switches, water flows, different things like that. Our transportation. In Kansas City, we are horrible at this. We're a commuter city, and we do not take advantage of pretty much anything that we have. We don't have a good transportation system. In fact, in most places, we don't have a transportation system at all other than getting in your car and driving. Also, there's a new way of looking at energy production, which is cogeneration, which produces electricity and heat. What's interesting is there is a campus, Northwest Missouri State University, and they have been doing this cogeneration for a long time. They create what's called green energy, but they burn biomass, and the biomass is pretty much grown around the campus, on the campus farm, or harvested from local areas. And they use the steam turbine to create energy, and in the winter, they also use all of that heat that is generated to heat their buildings. So it's kind of interesting. They've been doing that for a while. A lot of other campuses are looking at this, putting their own power generating stations on campus and using it for research. I don't know that Johnson County will ever quite get there as far as the sustainability initiatives. There's a pretty large capital outlay for that. So, urban sprawl. At first we had what were called steamboat suburbs in the 1830s, because, you would have little villages that were connected by rivers and things like that and steam engines. Then by, railroad suburbs in the 1850s started getting termed commuters in the 1860s, believe it or not. And we actually started having planned suburbs in the 1800s. It wasn't until the 1900s that we had streetcars and interurban railroads and different things like that. But our transportation system in this country in general is vastly underdeveloped. Is probably the best way to put it. And that consumes a lot of energy. We are a large country, and we are a not interconnected country. I mean, sure, you can get on a plane and you can go somewhere, but you can't get on a high-speed rail and go somewhere. You can't go across country on a high-speed rail like you can in a lot of other countries or even continents. So I don't know. And there's some different answers out there for us. We just don't know where we're going to go. But we do know that urban sprawl is something pretty severe, especially you can look at it here in Kansas City. Los Angeles doesn't sprawl because it has freeways. Los Angeles built the freeways because it sprawled. A lot of people like to blame the sprawl and everything on the freeways themselves, but the freeways are built because it sprawled out and you had to get to somewhere. So, you get a higher end suburb, people start clamoring and complaining, we want a road. And a lot of people want that road. They don't want a train to take them somewhere. So we see that here a lot in Kansas City. We like our independence, if you will. Light rail. This is something that if you've been around Kansas City, you've certainly heard significant talk about, and there's been clamoring for this for years, probably going on 30 years. I mean, I can tell you the history of it. There were two cities that were vying for light rail and federal dollars for it, and in 1969, Kansas City and Atlanta were the two finalists to get light rail. At that time, those two cities were approximately the same size. Atlanta won the federal contract and got money for light rail and for transportation, and their population is triple plus that of Kansas City now. So light rail did actually aid urban sprawl because it gave people faster access to get into the city's core. Sometimes light rail, the downside of it is sometimes light rail goes nowhere important. I know a lot of the clamoring and a lot of the complaining in Kansas City I heard so many times was, I'm not going to vote for light rail because it doesn't go to the airport. Well, so what? How many times do you actually go to the airport on a yearly basis? I know I go at most 3 or 4 times. So I would have much rather had a light rail that took me to downtown or the plaza or to somewhere close to where I work or out here to the college. But that didn't happen, and I don't know that it will. So the lines frequently service the owners and bypass others. So it frequently services, it depends on, when you build the light rail typically is supposed to service the people that live in the community and the owners of it. But a lot of times you also have to plan light rail to help your visitors get around. Tourism for sure increases in cities that have a good transportation system, but it is expensive, and usually it's not very profitable. It's usually a cost outlay or an expense. The urban rail era kind of came to an end. What brought an end to it was oil companies, tire manufacturers, and auto companies kind of pushed out urban rail systems, convincing people that they didn't need them because they wanted to sell cars and they wanted to sell buses. They wanted more of a busing system because they could build buses. You put tires on the buses, you put gas in the buses. And they actually got together and did this. And they actually started dismantling urban rail lines. They were purchasing them and taking them out of service and driving up the costs for their systems, which was kind of an interesting aspect. We kind of look back through our energy uses. The stationary gas engine, not very sustainable. Then early motorcycles, not sustainable. Then we had the Daimler automobile, and interestingly enough, a lot of the early vehicles were electric. They were not gas machines at the time. These were electric automobiles and worked off of electricity. Roadster here, even in the early 1900s, these were still operated by electricity, believe it or not. And then we started seeing an uptick going in toward World War I, and with the gasoline engine that came around in the early 1900s and started being built, we had a lot more things. World War I, railroads did not meet the Army's needs. We didn't have an interstate system here in the U.S. at the time. We had an old, outdated rail system, and it did not meet the need. So we found there used to be convoy routes. Lots of problems were around. It wasn't actually then until the end, after World War I, going into World War II, that we actually got a system. And it was the Eisenhower interstate system. And it was actually built for military and meeting the Army's needs that helped that. But then that interstate system encouraged everyone to see the country and drive around, and that started driving up our energy usage. Again, not very sustainable. So what can we do to make things sustainable? Well, we might be able to try and tap solar energy. Solar collectors, we've talked about, they can be passive or active. Passive, just is using the solar for heat. Active is capturing that and turning it into electricity somehow. Storing that solar energy is very problematic. And not all that sustainable. You have to store it in a battery, you have to put it back into the grid, you have to do something like that. And sometimes those are kind of dirty processes that create those tools. High temperature solar energy, these are solar cookers, things like that can be used. Solar heaters, things like that in certain areas that can do that. Utilities are promoting more renewable energies and trying to get more people involved. There are some subsidies, some tax credits, things like that. Photovoltaic cells that can capture solar energy. Electrical energy is difficult and expensive to store. It's usually kind of an on-demand thing. We need to create it, we need to use it, we need to generate it. It's not really that easy to store for long periods of time. If we could, then we wouldn't have to worry about power outages and things like that, but it doesn't work very well. The next thing that could be more sustainable could be fuel cells. Fuel cells have similar components. They work off of several different electrolytes that could be used in those fuel cells. Hydrogen could be used, other minerals could be used in fuel cells. But this is still a developing and emerging technology that we don't have a lot of right now. We could get energy from biomasses. We can burn biomass. But again, we're still burning something, so we're still adding carbon dioxide. Methane from biomass can be clean and efficient. Ethanol and biodiesel could, add to certain fuel supplies. However, they do tend to burn dirtier because of the lower carbon content. Cellulosic ethanol seems to be hope for the future. These are grasses, things like, for crying out loud, switchgrass, things like that, where we can get some of these cellulosic biofuels. Can biofuels be sustainable? Absolutely. They certainly are. One of the major ones that we're going to talk about next week is algae, and one of those things that's kind of hope for the future. What you're going to be asked to do is research some of these sustainability energy efforts, and we're going to have discussions about it. Algae is the one that I like the most. I've done quite a bit of research on it. We're going to have a pretty healthy discussion about it next week, but we want to look at some others, so I'm going to have you pick some and see what you can research. Ethanol. So if the U.S. uses 7 billion barrels of oil every year, that's 293 billion gallons. The ethanol equivalent is 439 billion gallons. So 2.8 gallons you can get 2.8 gallons of ethanol from 1 bushel of corn. So we would need 157 billion bushels of corn to fuel the United States. That is more than 10 times what we actually produce in the U.S. So that's not going to work out very well. We can supplement it, but that's about it. And it's not very sustainable, the 13 billion bushel that we make now. Energy from Earth's forces. So falling water uses that mechanical energy. It's been used forever. Wind is our fastest growing renewable energy source, and I think it's going to continue to be. Wind could actually meet all of our energy needs. I want you to kind of think about that. I sit here in my office looking out the window right now, and I see the leaves moving. We walk by Galileo's pavilion, and we see that turbine spinning. Wind could meet all of those needs that we have. Geothermal heat, tides, and waves could be other valuable resources. We could use the OTEC things that we're going to talk about a little bit. That's the ocean technologies for electrical currents. The ocean thermal electric conversion, OTEC there, might be useful. So we're going to talk about some of those and what we might be able to do with those a little bit next week too. This is just to kind of introduce you to some of those sustainable energy sources. Get you along that thought process. I will see you in class this evening for a very short period of time, and I'll explain more about that when we get there. Have a good day.